All right, everyone, now it's time to talk about the impending SCOTUS case. SCOTUS has agreed to hear this case. Whether or not they issue a final decision will remain to be seen. It is being preemptively blamed by the Democrats for their near-certain massive loss in 2022, assuming the decision comes in before that, and a very likely, in my opinion, loss in 2024. Certainly the decision would be entered in long before that time period. Link in the description, archived of course. Effectively what this case boils down to is a query over whether the Constitution should be construed as specifically giving the state legislatures sole power over most of the election laws, so districting and so forth, just the legislature, or whether other legislative components that are created thereafter by the legislator itself have some say in that process. What the Democrats want is for judges and other people to be able to effectively tell state legislatures how to do their job with regards to the election process at the core level. What's being argued in contrast is, no, the Constitution explicitly gives that right solely to the state legislature, to the state houses. It has nothing to do with judicial decisions. It certainly has nothing to do with watchdogs appointed by a governor or anything like that. They don't have any say over the process. The wording in the Constitution is fairly explicit. Now, let's argue pragmatism versus strict constructionism here. A strict interpretation of the Constitution quite clearly favors the latter party, the defendants in this case. I think plaintiffs in the case, sorry. That is that the state legislatures control that situation. They have the sole power to do the districting, etc., 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 and no other force should be able to really challenge them on this because none of the rules that were created post-constitutional era can retroactively nullify that constitutional right. Absent, again, a constitutional amendment. That is, except at the topmost SCOTUS level, judiciary wouldn't even have a say. They wouldn't have the ability to say that this district appears racist to us, therefore you can't use it. By the way, if gerrymandering were completely abolished, can I ask you something? Who would determine what the districts were? How would they be determined? If not by the legislature, somebody has to determine the districts for the purposes of actually having a House of Representatives. Well then, who will decide? Are you going to have the Supreme Court district the entire nation every 4 years? Or every 2 years, rather? Are federal courts going to get involved? That would be unconstitutional. State Supreme Courts? Some appointed federal government group or group appointed by state houses? You need to create a constitutional amendment in order to actually create the kind of process the Democrats have in mind. Right now we have a hybrid process because courts have been reluctant to take these cases up until now. And that's why I think that the strict construction side will win. SCOTUS would not have taken up this case unless it intended to overturn decades of precedent. Well, technically more than decades, by the way. Generally, the state legislatures have no legal problem in doing the districting, setting up the voting ramifications, etc. What we saw in 2020 is that executive branch politics and the judiciary and extra legislative groups managed to affect the voting process. In many cases, this was retrospectively called unconstitutional. Wisconsin, with the ballot drop boxes. That's not the only example, although it's the most recent. What happened is that, well-intentioned though some of the reforms for the election may be, randomly expanding mail-in voting, randomly extending voting period and stuff, it was not codified by the state legislatures in proper constitutional due order. The second possibility, so that's the strict constructionist side. A more pragmatic side, of course, is that there is some judicial oversight to the districting and other election process, because absent that, state legislatures will tend to devolve towards severe partisanship, locking in permanent majorities at the state level. The problem is that pragmatic argument is hyperextended by the Democrats. They want that same oversight for everywhere. So it doesn't matter if there's any legal battle or challenge to the districting or to the ramifications of how people are voting, where they're voting, how many are drop boxes allowed, can you vote without a mask on and stuff. You would be giving undue authority to a judiciary potentially, or to some watchdog, which involves the executive branch potentially creating and funding it in part. and that supersedes the constitutional content with regards to the state legislatures being able to have wide latitude in doing this. The perfect solution would be that the state legislatures have that latitude absent a very small amount of judicial authority. The problem is that I don't see any way in which those two can coexist. If you're a strict constructionist, the legislatures can't have any oversight over them, or only the most scant and meaningless. Absent, again, a Supreme Court case, nothing can be done to stop them from gerrymandering, from redistricting their state into a goddamn jigsaw puzzle. With the oversight, it gives the oversight authority the ability to do that. They can tell the legislature to fuck off. They can take a perfectly fair map that nobody has a problem with and say it's not equitable enough. We need to shift things around a little bit here because this underrepresented group doesn't have enough votes in order to have a representative. We need to do more for this group of people, and therefore we're forcing you to redistrict it according to this new plan that we have decided to set into motion. It's telling that the case was taken up. In the wake of Bruin and Roe, it's clear that the current incarnation of SCOTUS doesn't care about overturning precedent and the potential fallout from that. I speculate that in either a 5-4 or a 6-3, the Democrats will lose in this case, and state legislatures will gain greater latitude in the process of controlling the elections. By the way, that is the better outcome. The hope is that the state legislatures are more likely to use restraint in that newfound power. Although it was always theirs, it would have been, recognized by SCOTUS in a binding decision. My hope is that they will be more reluctant to potentially misuse that capability for partisan purposes than some watchdog from D.C. or some watchdog that's overseen by an equally partisan governor, or by a court system that is partisan. It's not supposed to be, but if we look at the patchwork of decisions in the United States, where one group of 3 justices comes to an entirely different legal conclusion to a group of 3 justices across the country on the same cut and dry case, using entirely different premises and languages, the problem is you do have an ideological divide there. I would say it would be most dangerous to give the judiciary any significant more additional power over the election process. Yes, it's better if elected officials, that at least some of which will be fair, are there than people that are appointed by explicitly partisan politicians, which is the judiciary system at large in general at both the state and federal level. Appointed by individuals that were elected, often singularly, and then voted on along partisan lines. How is that any less likely to result in racist or problematic or pseudo-equitable districting or something like that than just having the legislatures do it? It's a pig in a poke situation anyway, what's being argued for. The Legacymedia is looking at this situation and proactively claiming that the 2024 election will be stolen. The Trump people will cheat. When they win, because Biden, if he runs, he loses. Nobody likes Kamala, she'd lose. They don't really have any other recognizable candidates of note. If their evil Republicans win, it's clear it's a slow-rolling coup, and they cheated. It's not that people started rejecting, near 10-point inflation or any of these other problems that we have, or saying, hey, maybe we should stop poking the bear literally and edging more and more towards World War III, and decided to go with a more sane alternative. Nope. It'd be impossible for them to win unless they cheated. And you watch in 2024, if that happens, say Trump gets reelected, maybe DeSantis, Rand Paul, whoever, and they start rambling about the election being illegitimate due to the SCOTUS decision, not one tech firm will start banning people as the result of their open hostility and insurrectionist rhetoric towards the legitimacy of the then current incarnation of the U.S. government. The hypocrisy will be quite stark, by the way, and that's an official prediction if that occurs. That's about all. Peace out.